Hello, this is John T. Rhapsodes Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories, bringing you a spooky story from 1888 by Ambrose Bierce called Charles Ashmore's Trail, and a proposed scientific explanation thereafter by Mr. Bierce. Hear the words of old. The family of Christian Ashmore consisted of his wife, his mother, 2 grown daughters, and a son of 16 years. They lived in Troy, New York, were well-to-do, respectable persons, and had many friends, some of whom, reading these lines, will doubtless learn for the first time the extraordinary fate of the young man. From Troy, the Ashmores moved in 1871 or 1872 to Richmond, Indiana, and a year or two later to the vicinity of Quincy, Illinois, where Mr. Ashmore bought a farm and lived on it. At some little distance from the farmhouse was a spring with a constant flow of clear, cold water, whence the family derived its supply for domestic use at all seasons. On the evening of the 9th of November in 1878, at about 9 o'clock, young Charles Ashmore left the family circle about the hearth, took a tin bucket, and started toward the spring. As he did not return, the family became uneasy, and going to the door by which he had left the house, his father called without receiving an answer. The father then lighted a lantern, and with the eldest daughter, Martha, who insisted on accompanying him, went in search of her brother. A light snow had fallen, obliterating the path, but making the young man's trail conspicuous. Each footprint was plainly defined. After going a little more than halfway, perhaps 75 yards, the father, who was in advance, halted, and elevating his lantern stood peering intently into the darkness ahead. "What's the matter, Father?" the girl asked. This was the matter. The trail of the young man had abruptly ended, and all beyond was smooth, unbroken snow. The last footprints were as conspicuous as any in the line. The very nail marks of the shoes were distinctly visible. Mr. Ashmore looked upward, shading his eyes with his hat held between them and the lantern. The stars were shining. There was not a cloud in the sky. He was denied the explanation which had suggested itself, doubtful as it would have been, a new snowfall with a limit so plainly defined. Taking a wide circuit around Charles's footprints in the snow, so as to leave them undisturbed for further examination, the father proceeded to the spring, the daughter following, weak and terrified. Neither had spoken a word of what both had observed. The spring was covered with ice, hours old. Returning to the house, they noted the appearance of the snow on both sides of the trail its entire length. No tracks led away from it. The morning light showed nothing more. Smooth, spotless, unbroken, the shallow snow lay everywhere. 4 days later, the grief-stricken mother herself went to the spring for water. She came back and related that in passing the spot where the footprints had ended, she had heard the voice of her son Charles and had been eagerly calling to him, wandering about the place as she had fancied the voice to be now in one direction, now in another, until she was exhausted with fatigue and emotion. Questioned as to what the voice had said, the mother was unable to tell, yet averred that the words were perfectly distinct. In a moment, the entire family was at the place, but nothing was heard, and the voice was believed to be an hallucination caused by the mother's great anxiety and her disordered nerves. But for months afterward, at irregular intervals of a few days, the voice was heard by the several members of the family and by others. All declared it unmistakably the voice of Charles Ashmore. All agreed that it seemed to come from a great distance, faintly, yet with entire distinctness of articulation. Yet none could determine its direction, nor repeat its words. The intervals of silence grew longer and longer, the voice fainter and farther, and by midsummer it was heard no more. If anybody knows the fate of Charles Ashmore, it is probably his mother. She is now dead. And that concludes Ambrose Bierce's 1888 story, Charles Ashmore's Trail. What follows is Bierce's proffer of a scientific explanation titled Science to the Front. In connection with this subject of mysterious disappearance, of which every memory is stored with abundant example, it is pertinent to note the belief of Dr. Hem of Leipzig, not by way of explanation, unless the reader may choose to take it so, but because of its intrinsic interest as a singular speculation. This distinguished scientist has expounded his views in a book entitled Verschwinden und seine Theorie, which has attracted some attention, particularly, says one writer, among the followers of Hegel and mathematicians who hold to the actual existence of a so-called non-Euclidean space. That is to say, of space which has more dimensions than length, breadth, and thickness. Space in which it would be possible to tie a knot in an endless cord and to turn a rubber ball inside out without a solution of its continuity, or in other words, without breaking or cracking it. Dr. Hem believes that in the visible world there are void places, or vacua, and something more, holes, as it were, through which animate and inanimate objects may fall into the invisible world and be seen and heard no more. The theory is something like this. Space is pervaded by luminiferous ether, which is a material thing, as much a substance as air or water, though almost infinitely more attenuated. All force, all forms of energy must be propagated in this. Every process must take place in it, which takes place at all. But let us suppose that cavities exist in this otherwise universal medium, as caverns exist in the earth, or cells in a Swiss cheese. In such a cavity, there would be absolutely nothing. It would be such a vacuum as cannot be artificially produced. For if we pump the air from a receiver, there remains the luminiferous ether. Through one of these cavities light could not pass, for there would be nothing to bear it. Sound could not come from it. Nothing could be felt in it. It would not have a single one of the conditions necessary to the action of any of our senses. In such a void, in short, nothing whatever could occur. Now, in the words of the writer before quoted, The learned doctor himself nowhere puts it so concisely as, "A man enclosed in such a closet could neither see nor be seen, neither hear nor be heard, neither feel nor be felt, neither live nor die, for both life and death are processes which can take place only where there is force, and in empty space no force could exist." Are these the awful conditions, some will ask, under which the friends of the lost are to think of them as existing, and doomed forever to exist? Baldly and imperfectly as here stated, Dr. Hem's theory, insofar as it professes to be an adequate explanation of mysterious disappearances, is open to many obvious objections. To fewer, as he states it himself in the spacious volubility of his book. But even as expounded by its author, it does not explain, and in truth is incompatible with some incidents of, the occurrences related in these memoranda. For example, the sound of Charles Ashmore's voice. It is not my duty to endue facts and theories with affinity. And that concludes Ambrose Bierce's proffer of a scientific explanation for mysterious disappearances such as that of Charles Ashmore. Postscript. You may find this 19th century theory of people disappearing through void spots or thin spots into different dimensions familiar in the works of other famous fiction writers many years later. This is John T. Rhapsodies, Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, please help me earn the warm embrace of Mr. and Mrs. YouTubes who look with loving favor upon those channels whose listeners faithfully subscribe, like, comment, click the notification bell, and share the videos with their friends so that they too can hear the words of old.